Chapter 14. Halt sprang into Abelard's saddle as Horace still hesitated, uncertain what to do. "Get on with it!" Halt yelled. "They're coming!" At the same moment, Will arrived back at the cattle yard. "They're coming, Halt," he said, unnecessarily. There was a note of tension in his voice, and it was pitched a little higher than normal. "Get mounted. Once they're running, we'll keep driving them," Halt told him. Then he turned back to Horace. "Get them moving, Horace!" Horace was finally galvanized into action. He stepped forward and swung the folded cloak, smacking it right between the bull's horns and across his face. Then everything seemed to happen in a rush. The bull squealed with rage, blinked 3 or 4 times, then lowered his head and charged, stiff-legged, at his tormentor. He butted Horace in the midriff and, jerking his head upright, sent the unfortunate warrior sailing several meters, to land heavily on his back with a dull thud and an oof of escaping breath. For a second, it seemed the bull might follow up its advantage, but then Kika intervened. Trained for years to protect his master against attack in combat, the massive battle horse interposed himself between Horace and the bull. The bull squealed a challenge, pawing the ground in front of him, tearing up the grass and dirt, and tossing his head in fury. It was too much for Kika. In the Araluan animal world, there was a certain order of precedence, and a carefully bred and trained battle horse ranked far above a shaggy country bull of indeterminate lineage. The mighty horse reared onto his hind legs and danced forward, shrilling a challenge, his forehooves slashing the air in front of him. Those iron-shod hooves flashed past the bull's face, and he realized he was overmatched. Bellowing with frustration, he turned away, taking a few uncertain paces as he prepared to retreat. But he had defied Kika, challenged him even, and in the horse's mind, that insult must be erased. He dashed forward and gnashed his big blunt teeth at the bull, catching him on the rump and removing a painful piece of flesh and hide. The bull howled in pain and outrage and fear. He kicked his hind legs up in a vain attempt to catch his attacker. But Kika was trained in a hard school, and he had already pulled back. As the bull's rear hooves hit the ground again, Kika pirouetted and lashed out in his own turn, slamming his rear hooves into the bull's already damaged backside. That was the final straw. Fear, pain, and now the thundering impact of a double kick. The bull bellowed and took off, running across the field. Alarmed by his cries, the herd went with him, their panicked mooing and the dull thunder of their hooves filling the air. "Come on!" Halt yelled. He urged Abelard forward after the racing cattle, whipping at the rearmost with his bow. Will followed suit, riding to the other side of the herd to keep them bunched. The first of the Scotty had emerged from the thinning trees into the open ground of the field when the stampede broke. They saw the tightly packed knot of racing cattle coming at them, hesitated, turned to retreat, and blundered into the men behind them. A few, quicker thinking than the others, tried to run to the sides to escape the charge. Halt saw them and reined Abelard in, rising in his stirrups as he nocked an arrow and sent it hissing through the air, following it quickly with 3 more. 2 of the raiders went down in the long grass. On the far side of the herd, Will had seen Halt's action and followed suit. The Scotty quickly realized the danger of running to the side. Threatened by the hail of arrows, they bunched together uncertainly. A few seconds later, the crazed cattle smashed into them. The impact of blunt horns, sharp cloven hooves, and the hard-muscled bodies sent the Scotty raiders spinning and falling like 9-pins. As they went down, the cattle in the rear ranks continued to charge over them, injuring those who had already fallen even more severely. When the stampede passed, at least half of the raiding party were lying, seriously wounded on the field. The remainder had managed to escape to the point where the trees grew more densely. The cattle, reaching the thicker trees, swung off to the right and thundered away, bellowing still. Halt reined in, an arrow ready on his bowstring, with Abelard half turned to the raiders who watched him from the trees. Around him, a few survivors were slowly picking themselves up to hobble or crawl back to join their companions. Virtually none of the raiding party had escaped injury of some kind. 3 of them lay still and unmoving, struck down by the ranger's arrows. "Get back to Picta!" Halt called to them. "Half your men are dead or badly injured. Once the local people know about it, they'll hunt you down. Now get out of here!" The leader of the raiding party lay dead in the grass, trampled by half a dozen of the cattle after he'd been thrown from his feet. His former second in command regarded the grim figure facing him on the shaggy horse. As he watched, the second grey-cloaked horseman rode up beside his companion, his longbow threatening them as well. The Scotty knew that the success of a raid like this depended on speed and surprise. Strike swiftly, burn and kill, and run off the cattle. Then get back across the border before the enemy could organize themselves. Before they even knew there was a raiding party in the area. Speed and surprise were gone now. And once the local Araluans knew of their presence, his men would be easy targets as they limped and staggered, nursing their injuries and carrying their wounded back to One Raven Pass. The thought of abandoning his wounded countrymen never occurred to him. That wasn't the Scotty way. In addition, he'd seen the accuracy and speed of the 2 cloaked archers who faced him now. If they started shooting again, he could lose another half-dozen men in a matter of seconds. Shaking his head in frustration and despair, he signalled to his men, and they turned and made their painful way back towards the north. Will let go a deep breath and relaxed in his saddle. "Good thinking, Halt," he said. "That certainly worked like a charm." Halt shrugged diffidently. "Oh, it's nothing if you know how," he said. "Looks as if we have company," he added, nodding towards the farmhouse, where Horace stood, leaning painfully against Kika's side, his hands holding his bruised ribs. Behind the farmhouse, several figures were visible among the densely growing trees. As Halt and Will watched, they made their tentative way back towards the farm buildings. "They must have been hiding in the woods watching," Will said. Halt nodded grimly. "Yes, nice of them to lend us a hand, wasn't it?" He touched Abelard with his heel and began to canter slowly back to the cattle yard. Tug, sensing the motion as his companion tensed his muscles, followed a few paces behind. Horace nodded a greeting as they dismounted. Will frowned a little. His friend was still holding his ribs and seemed to be having trouble breathing without pain. "Are you all right?" Horace waved his concern aside, then winced as he did so. "Bruises," he said. "That's all. That little bull certainly knew how to use his head." The farm people had reached them now, and Halt greeted them. "Your farm's safe," he said. "They won't be back in a while." He couldn't help a small note of satisfaction creeping into his voice. There were 5 people. An old man and woman in their 50s, Will judged. Then a young couple in their 30s, and a boy who looked to be about 10. Grandparents, parents, and son, he thought. 3 generations. The older man spoke now. "Cattle are all run off. You ran them off." He said it accusingly. Will raised his eyebrows. "That's true," Halt said reasonably, "but you'll be able to get them back. They'll stop running soon." "Take days to round them up, it will," said the farmer lugubriously. Halt drew a deep breath. Will had known him for years. He knew Halt was making an enormous effort to keep his temper in check. Probably, he agreed, but at least you won't have to rebuild your farmhouse in the meantime. The farmer snorted. That's as well. We'll be days rounding up those cows again. All over the forest they'll be. That's better than lining a Scotty belly, Halt said. His restraint was becoming thinner and thinner. And who'll milk 'em when they're in the forest, eh? It was the younger man. In spite of his comparative youth, he seemed equally as doleful as his older companion. Need milking every day, they do, else they'll go dry. Of course, that might happen, Halt said, but better dry cows than no cows at all, surely. That's a matter for opinion, said Grandpa. Mind you, if we had the help of some men with horses to find them, we'd get it done quicker like. Men with horses, Halt said. Oh, you mean us? He turned to Will and Horace in disbelief. He does. He means us. The farmer was nodding. Aye, after all, you were the ones who ran them off in the first place. Weren't for you, they'd be back here. If it weren't for us, Halt told him, they'd be halfway to Picta by now. He glanced up at Will and Horace and realized they were both hiding grins. Far too obviously, in fact. It seemed to him that they were doing such a good job hiding their grins precisely so he would realize that they were hiding them. I don't believe this, he said to them. I don't exactly expect gratitude, but to be blamed for this man's troubles is a little much. Then he thought about what he had said. No, change that. I do expect gratitude, damn it. Then he turned back to the farmer. Sir, he said stiffly, it's due to our efforts that you still have your farmhouse, your barn, and your cattle yard. It's thanks to us that your cows are safe, if they are a little scattered. In the course of saving your property, my companion here suffered a cowardly attack from your vicious little bull. Now you can have the graciousness to say thank you, or I'll ask my friends to set fire to your farmhouse before we go on our way. The farmer regarded him stubbornly. Just 2 words, Halt said. Thank you. Well then, the farmer hesitated, swaying ponderously from side to side. He reminded Horace of the bull. Thank you, I suppose. It's our pleasure. Halt spat the words at him, then swung Abelard's head to the west. Horace, Will, let's go. They were halfway across the field when they heard the farmer add, But I don't see why you had to run off the cattle. Will grinned at the erect figure of the ranger riding beside him. Halt was all too obviously pretending that he hadn't heard the farmer's parting words. Halt, he said, you wouldn't really have burned down the house, would you? Halt turned a baleful gaze on him. Don't bet on it.